Hello everybody, this is another episode of What Would the Web Do? Today we talk about handling errors on the web, and mostly we'll talk about Schrödinger's link and how to deal with it. Mike had this idea of Schrödinger's link, so I'm really interested in what we will explore here, and we'll just talk about the fact that error handling is a little bit different on the web, and it's interesting to look at it, and it's one of our What Would the Web Do episodes. So Mike, what do you think is special about how the web, or more specifically HTTP, handles errors, or I don't know, deals with error situations, whatever you call it?
Well, yeah, actually, the way you phrased it is exactly one of the things I think is unique about HTTP and the web. In fact, with the HTTP protocol, there are no sort of protocol level errors or error codes. We have this thing called status, which is actually a wide range. And people who work in HTTP requests probably know the 100 series, which is there's going to be a continuation of here, we're not quite done yet. The 200 series, which says everything's okay. The 300 series says my response says you should go somewhere else to get your response. The 400 series, which says I think maybe you want to ask me again differently. And the 500 series, which says, you know what, I'm the server, I'm confused, there's a problem. And that's really the whole kit, right? So it's status. And typically, I think libraries, coding libraries, things like that, tend to use 400 as ways that servers can tell client, they return a 400 status if something isn't quite right, like the URL is not quite right or the body of the message is not quite right. And then we tend to think of those as an error response, but it's really just a status. And I think part of the reason for this is HTTP, or the web, is supposed to always be going. You know, it doesn't error out. It just has a change in status, like this, you know, the status is not so good right now or something. So I think we need to kind of get used. That's one of the things when you do HTTP programming is getting used to the idea that this is all just status, and status goes up and down. And in fact, you never really know for sure what conditions might occur, right? So I mean, that's the way I sort of think about it. It's this range of numbers. I don't know if you've thought about it much this way, but that's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it, that there's, to some extent, you could say the web always works. Or you could also say the web never fully works.
Yeah.
There's always something wrong somewhere on the web.
Yep.
So in the end, as somebody surfing the web, that's kind of useful information to maybe encounter if you get to one of those areas where something doesn't work as expected. But as a system, so to speak, that you interact with, right? The web, I think, by definition, always works. It just responds to you and says, hey, you know, like, based on what you want to do, here is what I can tell you how successful that is. And then there's a range of opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. This reminds me of what you just said, reminds me of John Gall's Systemantics book. A complex system is always running, even under error conditions, right? So the web is always running, and there's always something going on somewhere. And that leads to the little tease you had in the beginning. And that is, you know, the web works by following links, like clicking on links and following links and filling in forms. And the thing is, when you're clicking on a link, you don't really know if it's going to work. You don't know what's happening at the other end. If it's pointing to another server, somebody else's API, or just somebody else's document storage, you know, that server may not be up. That document may not be there. So that's why I like to call it, it's the Schrodinger's link. You know, it's the old physics experiment, Schrodinger's cat in a box. We don't know if the cat's alive or dead until we look. And I think we don't know if that link is alive or dead until we click on it. And that's really fundamental to the way the web works, right?
So given that definition, which I love, every link is Schrodinger's link, right?
Yeah.
By definition, there's no Schrodinger's link.
That's correct. That's right. There's always a mystery. There's always a mystery at the end of any link. And that's where this whole idea of status codes becomes super important, because the status collection is actually quite rich. Actually, there's two things about it. We do these statuses in series, 400 series, 500 series, 200 series. And I love that that's actually an open-ended design. So I think there are some like 25 or maybe 30 numbers defined for 400, right? But you could have 100 different 400 type statuses at some day. You can keep adding, which is, again, I love the foresight of the HTTP protocol to say, yeah, someday we might invent, 499 or 472 or something like that. And we'll do that later. So I love that idea behind it. But there are a bunch of status codes that I think are helpful that we don't see very much, such as 410, right? 410 gone, which means there's nothing here. If you do the Schrodinger's link click, there's nothing here, and there never will be here. You can stop clicking here. Don't come back, which we just don't see enough of. And versioning is a great candidate for using some 410 gones, I think.
So you pointed out that the error codes, or the status codes, sorry, that the status codes are evolving, or that the collection of them is evolving over time. Do you have a favorite one that was added later on that you just kind of like the idea that it was created afterwards and it kind of seems to make sense?
I can't, that's a really good question. And I don't have one that comes to mind right now. Do you? I haven't really thought about it this way. This is really good.
I think for the 400 series, my favorite one is 451.
What is that?
I think that's the Fahrenheit 451.
Oh,
one,
really?
Yeah.
So
that's
right.
The one that says unavailable for legal reasons. And I love, it's kind of like almost a subversive error code where you can say, I really would like to give that to you, but I'm not allowed to. But wow. I want to tell you that I'm not allowed to do that.
I love that. I love that idea. See, this to me, again, is why I really love the protocol, because it allows this kind of even snarky kind of thing going on. That's great. I don't know enough about this. Do you have any idea about the history, like who's credited with creating that?
I remember that when it was created, there was quite a bit of discussion going on. I remember Tim Bray being involved.
Sure.
I'm not sure whether he ended up actually writing it. And it was, I don't even know. I think it was some US legislation that came out. And I mean, there are these weird things about at least some, I think the Patriot Act, or, some of these legislation in America where you are not allowed to do something, but you're not even allowed to say that you're not allowed to do it, which is kind of like, I don't know. It's just strange.
That is very weird. And you know what? I did look it up. You are exactly correct. It was Tim Bray. It was completed in 2016, and it's actually 7725 is the RFC. That is very good. That's a great cut. I love this. I love that.
That was just a good story. I like how that came into being.
I love that story. Now, this leads to, like, numbering, and talking about numbers leads to a sort of a classic case of mixing application error conditions and network status conditions in HTTP. And that is, I see this almost all the time. Developers always ask, look, if I have a URL that returns a list, like a filtered list, Give me all of the customers who have an outstanding balance as of the end of the month. And that list is empty. Like, I don't have any customers in that status. Should I return a 200 okay for that response with an empty, or should I return a 404 and nothing? Have you ever seen this kind of discussion before?
Yeah, of course. It's I think another I think popular thing there is, if something existed and now it doesn't exist anymore, right? Should I report a 410 or should I report a 404? And I think sometimes it's also a little bit a question of information leaking. You know, do you want to say that this existed or no? Right? That may be interesting.
Yep, that's a classic one on security issues, right? So if somebody touches a link and you don't have rights to do it, there's actually a philosophy point of view which says, don't tell them that they're not authorized for this resource. Tell them there is no such resource, right?
It's the same as login forms, right? Where you tell something that, yeah, sure, this account exists. You just keep guessing the password.
Yes,
you'll get lucky eventually.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So now we're sort of into this zone where the status codes are, the status codes you use are affected by your style or your ethos or even security considerations, which again just reminds me that HTTP is such a rich sort of landscape or palette. You can use these things in lots of creative ways. So I don't know if you have an example. What do you tell people when they ask you these kinds of questions? Empty list, 404. What do you say to them?
I think that's hard to say in general. So in the end, I think it's like you said, it's a design decision, right? What do you want to communicate to somebody when they encounter this situation? And sometimes it may be better to communicate just a more generic response. Sometimes you might want to be more specific because that's okay for your scenario, or that's part of how you want to design the API, right? It can be part of your way of how you want to provide, let's say, a service. So for example, one of the things I find interesting is that more and more websites also start serving 404s, not just as generic 404s, but sometimes they also actually send you a whole page that tells you, we don't have this, but maybe this is what you were interested in, or, so they sometimes really try to be helpful instead of just telling you, well, there's nothing there. And I think that turns it into a design exercise, right? And I think you've gone through that as well, right? With some design exercises for these things.
Yep. So a good example, because I've designed some message formats like collection JSON and Uber and HAL forms and things. And one of the things I try to do in my message designs is create an error object or some kind of error section that tells people when you build your client, be prepared that you might get an error response object and that you should display it this way. And it's got the title and maybe even an internal code, like an error code or number or something. So trying to build that in, because often just saying 400 or 410 or 425 or 451 is not really enough. People are just sort of left staring at a page, whereas you can give them some more information back. So I do see more of that, like you say. Even people saying in HTML, there'll be a div that has, class error and things like that. That's a great practice. So building that into your formats, building that into your framework, and building that into your style, I think is very, very helpful. However, there's another approach which you took with an RFC a few years ago, and that is what?
That would be a generic response where instead of designing specific messages for specific APIs, you just reuse one that exists, right? So we have this where it's not called error, it's called problem reports, because the idea was to not say error. But yeah, it's RFC 7807, and it's actually under revision right now. So if you're interested in that, check it out. It's under revision, and it's being discussed in the HTTP building block working group, the IETF.
No kidding. So 7807 is the RFC that explains the problem details type, which you had helped author. And there's what they call a BIS, like an update. Is that what's going on for a new version?
Yes, there's a draft for the BIS version out there. It's partly just about clarification. So one of the things, for example, was that the identifier, if you want to identify the error, the problem type in more detail, is a URI. And there's always this problem of, well, is that supposed to be a link that you can follow, or is it just an identifier that happens to look like a URI? So it's like there has been some confusion around what that means. There also is a discussion whether multiple problems maybe can be reported, or if there's several things that may be problematic with your request, that you can report that as well. So it's a couple, I would say, of minor tweaks, and just because it has become relatively widely used. And then I think over time, these things tend to be popular enough that people say, yeah, this is nice, but we could make it a little better. And then that's what's happening right now.
And again, that's the thing I love about the web, which is, we can make this a little bit better. Let's go through this. And I use 7807 in my last book about designing and building great web APIs. All of the error messages that I use are actually through 7807 format. So I just love it. I kind of build it into a lot of the things that I work on.
So have you stopped developing your own messages?
No, you know me. I'm incorrigible in that regard. But often, the reality is my own messages aren't often very popular. Other people, they want to use HAL or Siren or just plain HTML or just plain JSON, with a profile. So you do what you do, and that's what the web does. You allow people to use their own format. So the problem details, keep saying this. Problem details is a very helpful format. I appreciate all that. So that's the story, right? I mean, we have status everywhere. The HTTP always runs, but every link, as you say, every link is Schrodinger's link. We don't really know.
Every link is Schrodinger's link. Absolutely, yes. I love that term.
Yeah. So that's what we can go away with. And to me, that's really one of, again, the beauties of the web, that we have this extreme late binding. Alan Kay called it extreme late binding. We don't know until the last second if this is really a good connection, and we recover and we move on. And I think that's just fantastic.
And I think this also gives us a nice lead-in, so to speak, for a potential follow-up topic, right? Where we could talk about, like, now what does it mean to live in a place, in a space with Schrodinger's links, right? How does that influence your work as a developer, where you can never be sure that whenever you follow the next link, it's actually going to work? So which kind of design actually makes most sense in that environment? I think that's the interesting question there.
Yep, I think that's right, and that especially plays out with APIs. For documents, okay, so there's no document at the other end. But if I tell you, go here to compute the the taxing, and then come back to me, and there's nothing at the other end, how do applications cope? So that'll be a good episode. That'll be good. Maybe we can do that on a future one.
Okay, let's see whether we can come up with another nice term like Schrodinger's link. I'm not quite sure what it might be, but we have a little time to think about that.
Cool. All right.
As usual, Mike, thanks so much. This was fun, and I hope everybody liked it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so that you will see our follow-up about how to survive Schrodinger's links. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye. He's good.